I am not afraid of death. And that is truly because of what I've seen. Like the more I see death, the less and less I'm afraid of it. One, because of biology and like truly watching it and seeing how our bodies seem to be built to do it. And because of things I've experienced as a hospice nurse.
Today's conversation is a really big one, and it's something that every single person is going to experience at some point in their life, but it's the conversation that we all avoid. We're talking about death. We're also talking about palliative care. We're talking about end-of-life care. And the reason for that is because death seems to be the big thing. We talk about everything on this podcast. There's nothing that is off limits. But in society, it is the one conversation that makes so many of us uncomfortable to speak about for good reason. But it's also the one thing that none of us are going to be able to avoid. It is going to happen to every single person listening to this. But I think the bigger and harder part isn't necessarily dealing with our own realities around our mortality. It's around the fact that the people that we love more than anyone in the world are also at some point going to die. And today we have an incredible woman joining us. Her name is Julie McFadden. If you've seen her on TikTok, she is Hospice Nurse Julie. She's got over 3 million followers, and this is a conversation that she has daily. She is the author of an incredible book called Nothing to Fear, and it is all about demystifying death to live more fully. Julie, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. I'm so honored. I can't wait to talk to you guys.
Julie, we're really looking forward to today's chat, and it is going to get a little bit more serious. But before we do that, we do an accidentally unfiltered, an embarrassing story with every guest, and we would love to hear yours.
Oh my God. When you guys first asked me this, so just so everyone knows, I'm really open about this. I am 8 years sober. So I had a whole life. I got sober at 33. So prior to getting sober at 33, I have so many embarrassing things, sober and not sober, that I could go into. But I think because Rebel Wilson said something about poop, right?
She pooed in someone's lawn in the daylight in Hollywood, yes.
Yeah.
In Hollywood. Okay, so I have...
You can't be worse.
I don't know if it's worse or not, but this is so graphic, but I think it's hilarious. Okay, so I poop, like I have like big poops. My dad always jokes about how I should have a breaking stick when I go to the bathroom, like to break up the poop.
How does your dad know how big your poos are, Julie?
Because we talk about it, because I used to plug the toilet all the time.
As a kid.
Yes. So with that being said, I became like insecure about it because I wouldn't want to like go somewhere and like poop and plug the toilet and whatever, right? And one time I couldn't help it. There's just times you couldn't help it. And it was at a guy's house who I barely knew. And I pooed in his toilet and it wouldn't go down.
How big are we talking, Julie?
Big. Coke can.
Oh, so
like,
not just long, but thick.
It's
thick.
You can't flush that.
It's not even about long. It's the thickness. And like, I need to like eat more fiber. Like it's too hard, like all the things. Like the poop is just wrong. But I called my best friend in the bathroom and was like, oh my God, I'm at so-and-so's house. I cannot get the poop down. Da, 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 da. I think I'm going to take it out of the toilet.
No, you didn't do that.
No, of course you did. That's what you have to do. You have to hide
That's what you have to do.
Yeah. This is literally an urban legend, but you have lived the urban legend.
I took it out of the toilet. And honestly, because it was so many years ago, I can't remember if I like threw it out the window, like just took it and threw it out the window. Or if I actually was like, be right back, and like went out, like somehow got outside and just put it outside.
But how would you have carried it outside?
That's what I mean. I don't fully remember because there's a part of my life that's like kind of grayed out, like browned out instead of blacked out.
Pooed out, yeah.
So I know I did it because my friend and I always talk about this, and she'll always be like, remember that time you called me? I can't even remember who the guy was. But I know that I pooped in someone's toilet and I removed the poop with tissue and I either threw it out the window or somehow got it outside.
Imagine, Julie, being a man who is so insignificant that you remember a shit over him. That's what I
had to say the same thing. I was like, that's the only thing you remember of that night speaks volumes about that poor guy.
That poor guy. And like, did he know? Like, sometimes I felt like I was being really sneaky and like, maybe I wasn't. Like, maybe he really was like, maybe I've never heard from him because he knew I did it.
Or maybe because you threw out the window and a giant poop landed on his car.
He found it in the garden. He's like, that is suspiciously close to the window.
Oh, that's so gross. That's so gross. But that's probably, and not to be even worse, but I have like, maybe not many stories like that, but kind of.
Julie, we will let you off the hook because as much as that is hugely embarrassing, the work that you do is incredible. And it takes a very special person
to throw their poo out the window.
Aside, it takes a very special person to do and to be in the kind of work that you do. And I think that for anybody who has a family member who is going through or who has been through palliative care, there is a real understanding around like the absolute kindness and empathy that a human must have to work in that sort of, I don't want to call it an industry, but to work in palliative care, to work in end-of-life care. Can you tell us a little bit around why you got into this in the first place?
Yeah, so I speak about this a lot on my channel and in my book about what drove me into hospice and then into just educating in general. And most of the reason is because I was an ICU nurse, intensive care unit nurse for many years before I was a hospice nurse, where we were doing basically the opposite. We were trying to keep people alive, basically at all costs. I felt like at first it felt right. And there are some times when that is amazing. And then the longer I was an ICU nurse, the longer I was like, oof, we are truly doing people a disservice by keeping them alive at all costs and not having end-of-life conversations. And that's what eventually moved me into becoming a hospice and palliative care nurse. It took a long time, but I eventually got there. I was in the ICU for 8 years. And after 2 years, I was like done, but I still stayed for another 6. And the most surprising thing to me when I first became a hospice nurse that first year was seeing how little we had to do to help people die, that our bodies were built to do it. And there were so many built-in mechanisms biologically to help us do that. Like watching someone die in the ICU versus watching someone die in hospice is like night and day to me, because we would allow the natural processes to take over in hospice, which usually led to a more peaceful death, even though it's still, people still look different when they're dying, which is a whole nother thing we could get into, but it's more peaceful.
It's so hard because even as you say this, and I'm going to get upset as I do on every episode at the moment. My stepdad, he's currently in palliative care for prostate cancer. And it's really hard to grapple when you're the person who so desperately wants that person to stay alive because you want them to enjoy more time with your family, more time with their grandchildren. It's really hard to process this idea of letting someone go, letting someone die, especially when you think you have the opportunity to keep them alive a little bit longer, because it maybe in some ways it comes from like a selfish place of wanting just more time with them, even if that time is compromised. How do you think we get to a place as a society, as people, where we can be more accepting of end of life and be more prepared for it, I guess?
Yeah, I think by what you're doing, number one. So I don't necessarily believe that we have to have like a death positive. Like we don't have to feel like positive about what's happening.
Yeah.
We can be I've had people who are dying, young people with young children, like look me in the eye and say like, I'm so pissed that I'm dying. I'm angry. I don't want to die. I'm afraid. And they still, of course, they're still going to, right? But there's something about speaking that truth that just releases it just a little bit, even for that moment. So even you coming on here and being like, I'm upset, or I'm going to get upset, or I want it to be longer, I think personally will still help you and help your family in the long run, because at least you're talking about it. At least you're saying these things. Okay, so that's one. And unfortunately, there is no alternative. Like to me, there isn't an alternative. Like your stepdad will die kind of no matter what. Totally. Even if you, let's just say, even if you took all the things like, no, we're not going to allow it to happen. We're not going to let it happen. It still will, because no one lives forever. Like not just because of him, but generally speaking, no one will.
Yeah.
So since we know that no one lives forever, how can we be here now and accept what is in the moment we're in with him now? like versus like this fighting of like, not yet, not yet, not yet. I mean, it's you're human, so it's going to go up and down. I'm sure you've already experienced moments of feeling the release of maybe not letting go, but like this release of being with him presently. And then it goes to angry, and then it goes to sad, and then it goes to detaching. That's all normal and painful.
Yeah, and I would say that people have different experiences of it because like grappling with the idea that your 94-year-old grandfather is going to pass away is very, very different to grappling with the idea that your child is going to pass away. You know, there is a hugely varied spectrum of how people are going to be able to process death. And some of it feels so much less justifiable.
Also, I want you to know that only because this is personally happening to you right now. So I want you to be super open with me about like, if I'm saying something that you are like, yeah, but that hasn't been my experience. This is how it's been for me. I would love for you to do that so that I can help answer questions if you do have some, just so that. And two, I think education about death and dying will help make things easier and less scary, but not less sad.
Yeah.
It's not going to make it less sad. It's still hard and sad. You're still losing someone you deeply, deeply love. Because we know it's happening, is there a way where we can learn as much as we can so in the moments when it is happening or the moments it takes to happen, you don't have tons of fear? You'll still be sad, but maybe not tons of fear around it. That's my hope for you and for anyone who's going through this, is that the fear can be at least somewhat subsided so you can be present even in your sadness. That makes sense?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
It really does.
Julie, you speak about death anxiety, and I think it's something a lot of people probably grapple with, is a fear of death. I myself can't work out if I'm scared of death as a whole or of dying young or of my family dying. I can't work out what I am. I don't think I'm scared of dying when the time comes, but I think I'm scared if it comes too soon. And I don't know if that makes any sense.
Totally.
Are you someone that helps people pass away constantly and is always surrounded by it? Are you scared of death?
I'm still going to have a human experience. So if I get diagnosed with something terminal tomorrow or something drastically changes in my life because of my health, or I wasn't in an accident, something like that, I will still have like anger and sadness and fear. Like I'll still have all of the roller coaster of emotions intermittently. And generally speaking, I am not afraid of death. And that is truly because of what I've seen. Like the more I see death, the less and less I'm afraid of it. One, because of biology and like truly watching it and seeing how our bodies seem to be built to do it. And because of things I've experienced as a hospice nurse that are unexplainable and hard. I'm happy to talk about it, but it is hard to like put words to it. But it feels like I've watched so many people take their last breath. And because I don't have tons of grief involved, it's not my mom, it's not my dad, at least not yet. It's like I can have a different view of it. And whenever I experienced watching someone give birth, I always liken it to this, because when I've seen babies being born, I get this feeling, I think most people do, where you're kind of like, whoa, like it's a baby. It's, you know, I've never had my own baby, but I've just seen people have babies. And even that, I'm like, where'd this baby come from? Like, hi, baby. Oh my gosh, you know? And that is oddly the same feeling I get when I watch someone die. It's not like that excited feeling, but it's like that same, like something expands.
Yeah.
And it feels beautiful. It feels sacred. It feels like they're going home. And I really believe, like, ever since I've been little, and this is just my belief, so it doesn't matter, but ever since I've been little, I've always felt homesick for a place that I can't remember.
Wow.
And I feel like when I die, I'm going to go to that place.
Yeah.
And I think everyone does.
That's very beautiful. Talk me through. It really is. I would love you to talk a little bit about, you say that you are able to witness it from, you know, the experience of not being traumatized by the grief. So you can see and experience what death is firsthand. The way that you describe it is very beautiful, but also from a biological sense, what is it that happens? What is it that seems to be like the common pattern, I guess, of how people prepare themselves for that part of what death looks like?
Yeah, so almost everyone will, around 6 months before death, almost everyone becomes a little more quiet, a little more like introspective. I think because their psyche is preparing, their body is preparing. Biologically, our bodies will turn off the hunger and thirst mechanism in our brain because the body almost knows before we do that we're preparing to die. So almost everybody dying, if we know they're dying from something terminal, will start being less hungry and less thirsty. And almost everyone will start sleeping more. And they really start sleeping more because our calcium levels rise. And high calcium levels make you sleepy. So our bodies, so just generally speaking, now there are some diseases that cause a lot of symptoms which need to be managed, which is a whole nother story. But just generally speaking, if a body is like, hey, I can tell my body is something's wrong and I'm preparing to die, the person will be more sleepy and eat and drink less. And the more you kind of allow that to naturally happen, and that's hard to do especially if you're young and have children, and so it's not always easy to not worry about that. But if you don't worry about that and just sort of think like, well, I'm going to listen to my body and sleep when I want to sleep and only eat when I want to eat, and maybe that's never. When people do that, I have seen the wonders of the body. And even though they still die, it's very peaceful. And some people need no medication. Not that I'm against medication, believe me. I'm all for the kitchen sink if you need it. But like, I've just seen it so many times where people have just slowly and naturally died. And I've seen it enough that it's like, wow, the body really biologically helps us die. And during the actively dying phase, which is the last phase of life, which scares most people because people look very different during that time. They're unconscious. They have changes in breathing, changes in skin color. All of these things that are happening during that time are biological responses, and the body helping itself die. Metabolically, things change. Just like I like to liken it to labor, but labor is associated with pain. So it's hard. But like crazy things are happening during birth where like the woman's body's just doing stuff to have a baby and the baby survives most of the time, right?
Yeah,
so
incredible.
It's like that-ish, except I would say like people think dying's painful. Diseases you die from can be painful, but the death itself is not. It does not hurt.
I've heard, and I don't know if this is like an urban legend or a bit of a myth, but I've heard multiple times that when people do die, that it can be almost euphoric and visionary. Like a lot of different things can be happening. And I've heard it a lot with drowning. Like a lot of people say, people have drowned before and been brought back, for example. And I'm just using this as an example. But people have said in the moment of death, before they were brought back, they've never felt more peaceful in their life. Is that what you're saying you believe, or has been proven that a lot of death is like in that final moment when you just said it's very peaceful, they close their eyes, they take their last breath? Is there any proof behind that?
I think it has been proven. I don't think we know why. So I think we have proved it in the sense of being in healthcare and watching hundreds of people do it and kind of knowing the opposite of what that is. Like we can tell, people always ask like, well, how do you know they're okay? And it's like, well, because one, you're a trained professional and the body is like a dying body is like a baby. A baby can't verbally say like, I'm hungry, I'm wet, but it'll cry and moan and roll around and be fussy if it's not okay. A person dying will do the same thing. So if they're not doing that, I guess we would say they must be okay. And I think enough people have kind of quote unquote come back from things where they shouldn't have come back from to say, whether or not like they actually went somewhere or not, either way, something is happening to comfort them. That's the thing is like, I have no agenda to make someone believe that there's like an afterlife or that something else happens. But I do feel like we have enough evidence to show that we might not be able to explain why it happens, but it does happen. Something happens biologically, maybe, to make us feel comforted. To like, if you think about when you say you really got like, if someone broke an arm, eventually it hurts. But usually that first initial shock, your body does something to protect you so you do not feel what is happening. And I think that's kind of like what death is like too. I think we have a bunch of mechanisms built in to biologically help us and comfort us.
What about the idea, and I'm not sure if there is a name for it, I'm sure there is, but how a lot of people when they're approaching death can have a lot of mental clarity just prior to or within, moments before, whether that's clarity around recollecting their past or feeling connected to people who have already passed away. What has been your experience with those moments?
Yeah, so that's one of the main things I started educating about when I first started Hospice Nurse Julie. And it's in my book. I have a whole chapter, chapter 6. It's my longest chapter because there's so much to talk about. I call it deathbed phenomena. So it's just things that happen. And again, like, we don't know why. So as healthcare professionals, these things that we call deathbed phenomena are mysteries. We don't know why that happened. We just know that they do, and they do a lot. And we have to educate about it. The number one thing that happens the most is something called terminal lucidity, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So that happens in 1 in 3 patients.
Wow.
1 in every 3. That's insane. Where people have, they call it the burst of energy, the rally, where someone looks like they're getting very close to death, and then suddenly, boom, they have a really good day. They wake up, they're cleared. They might say they're hungry. They might eat a cheeseburger, get up and walk. Everyone's rally is kind of different. But the thing with the rally is that they die shortly after. So you can't kind of have the rally for a long period of time. That's not the rally.
And I think often people can be lulled into a false sense that, oh my God, they're going to get better. The same thing happened with my grandfather. He was in hospital. We knew he was going to pass away. He had no kidney function left. Like, he couldn't possibly have lived. And we all came down to say our goodbyes. And then he was so good. Like, the next day he woke up, he was sitting up in bed. He was having a full conversation with us after being basically almost in a coma. And then the next day he passed away. And it was like, but he was so good yesterday. Like, how?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is it. That is terminal lucidity.
Do they know why it happens, Julie?
No, they don't know.
It's just one of these phenomena. I guess that's why they call it a phenomenon, right? Just because.
Yeah. People will always say, because of that video always goes viral if I post it. And there's always people commenting, being like, it's DMT, like different things that they think they know.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, there's theories, but no, we don't really know. We don't really know. And the second one that happens the most is visioning. So visioning is, and that I always like to educate about, because it's so clear, and I wouldn't have believed it myself unless I've witnessed it so many times. Visioning is when people start seeing dead relatives, dead loved ones, dead pets that have died. And the cool thing about visioning, to me, that most people don't know, is that it usually happens a few weeks before death. So if someone comes to me as a hospice nurse and says that they're seeing their dead parents, kind of concerned, because the person seeing them is usually alert and oriented enough to know that this is strange.
Yeah.
Right? They're usually comforted, but they're still like, what's happening with me? What's going on? That can kind of trigger you as a hospice nurse to know that that person's likely going to die within, I'd say, a few weeks.
Wow.
That's what usually happens. And it's always comforting. They're mostly clear-headed. So they're not, people think it's like at the last minute they're seeing these things. No, it's usually a few weeks, and they're clear-headed, and they're kind of like, last night, my dad came to me. He said everything was going to be okay. He'd come to get me a little bit later, and I feel better now.
Oh,
like that. And you're like, what?
But
over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Do you think it's just the body's way of maybe subconsciously knowing? Like, maybe the person doesn't consciously know, but the body subconsciously knows that this is happening, and it's like preparing them for a level of comfort. And it's a beautiful experience, I imagine. And I imagine if it's your end of life, that's what you want to be doing. You want to be seeing all the people that mean the most to you that have gone on to the afterlife.
Yeah, I mean, I try to stay on like a thin line of like, I never want to be like, I believe that they really are seeing their dead relatives. I'd like to be on the line of like, who knows? Like, I'm not here to tell you why it's happening.
Yeah.
I'm just here to tell you that it does happen, and you guys can interpret it however you want. It could be and guess what? If our body biologically does that to make us more comfortable, that's amazing.
Amazing.
That's amazing. If they really are seeing their dead relatives, that's amazing. Like, I think either way, that's amazing.
Julie, I want to talk to you about something we've talked about on the podcast before, and it's definitely a very serious issue, but something that is not overly prevalent here and available in Australia, and that is voluntary euthanasia. We spoke with a friend of mine who unfortunately will pass away, and she has chosen to end her life when the time comes. But to do that from Australia, she's had to pre-book in to, I believe it's Finland. Like it's a country that she had to find that would allow her to do it. She's literally like booked a space and booked the medication, and when the time comes, she'll have to travel there early enough, and she'll be quite young, unfortunately. It's horrific. But listening to her story about how hard it's going to be for her to end her life when it comes was really horrific. And I know that you are in the state of California, where you do have quite loose euthanasia laws. Since you've been around it so much, and I've watched a lot of your videos talking about you being there when people have taken the end-of-life medication, what are your thoughts surrounding voluntary euthanasia now? Because it's such a hot topic and such a fierce debate with a lot of people. And I personally think, why do we as people and families, for example, if we have a dog that is unwell and is in pain, we say the animal's in pain, the kind thing to do is to put it down. But all of a sudden, when we're talking about humans and people we love who don't have an outcome other than death, and they are in horrific pain themselves, so many countries, Australia included, we make them fight. We make them stay till the end. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are now, seeing as though you're around it all day, every day.
I think it's strange when other people try to tell other people what they can do with their bodies. That's weird to me. Like, I don't know, like when you were like, this is such a hot debate, right? Like, I get it, because every time I post those videos, it's a hot debate in my comments. You know, that's the only time people are consistently telling me I'm going to hell for murder, which is so wild to me, because I truly think, even if you don't believe in it, right? Even if you believe that the God you believe in would send you to hell if you did this, and the person who's doing, but that's what your belief is. You believe that. So you don't get to take the medication if you don't want to. Why do you have to not allow someone else to? Like, because someone else believes something different. So I've never understood people who want to have a say in other people's rights. So I'm all for it, if you couldn't tell. I'm all for it. It's not federally allowed, so only certain states can do it. And California is one of those states, and I'm in California. And we don't ever make any of our nurses or doctors be a part of the program if they don't want to be a part of it. Because again, it's a heated debate and not everyone believes in it. And even, I guess I feel like even if I didn't believe in it, I still wouldn't put my beliefs on other people. I would still allow everyone else to just do what they wanted.
Julie, what's been your experience of euthanasia, being in the room of a natural occurring death and being in the room with people who have chosen the point of which they want to end their life? How is it different, and what is your experience of it?
The way it's different is it's faster. So one, it's faster. I can't be a part of it, by the way. So I can be in the room, but I can't like touch the medication. I can't mix the medication. I can't do anything except for like be there and help them, like as far as witnessing it.
Yeah.
Right. In my experiences, it's just like actively dying. So I was talking to you about the actively dying phase, which is the last phase of life. This person experiences that still, but it's quicker. So they'll drink the drink, and which one thing that surprised me is that like in 5 to 7 minutes, they will be unconscious, like not just sleeping, like fully unconscious.
Wow.
And then it usually takes about 45 minutes, depending on the person, to actively die. So go through those actively dying phases, which is not uncomfortable. So the difference is it's faster. And I will say emotionally for me, just from being the one who's witnessing it, there is something about it that feels harder to me. So like whenever I do witness it, I'm always very like solemn and contemplative afterwards. I might like take a couple of days off of work afterwards, because it is heavy, because that person, I just think I don't know if the word's like courageous, like to watch someone have to drink this medicine so they die, the fact that they want to, there's just something profound about it, profound enough that it makes me kind of be like, whoa, what is life? And like, one second they're alive and the next second they're not. And that the line between the two is so thin, and they were so vibrant a second ago and now they're dead. I'm okay with it, but it's still wild to witness.
Julie, I'd love you to just tell everyone listening a story that I heard you tell about you witnessing one of these euthanasias with a woman that had lost her husband and her family was there. And I'd love you to just tell that again from your perspective, because I felt like it really really got me thinking about the whole idea and how I feel about it and why people choose to do it and how it can be.
So I had done the hospice admission for this family, and this woman was elderly, upper 90s. She was just over it. She felt like she was super old, and she had old elderly children. They were like in their upper 70s, early 80s. Like they were all just kind of like, and she was just over it. She was like, I retired early at 60. Thinking I was going to die soon. I had 20 years with my husband and we traveled. We did everything we wanted to do. And then I basically lived like another 20 years after that. She's like, I'm over this.
She's
done.
like not in the late 90s.
Like she was done. And she started talking about how she didn't want to go through like being incontinent and having her kids have to take care of her because they were elderly too. So she started asking me about the end of life medication. And we'd provide that, not on hospice, but the hospital I work for does. So I just gave them the information and how to look into it because like we can't really do it on hospice. They have to go out and get it on their own because hospice is federally funded and this is not a federal law. So anyway, weeks later, I happened to be working on call and they called me being like, my office called me being like, hey, this person wants to take the end of life medicine. Could you be there to help them and just sort of witness it for them? And if they need anything, blah, blah, blah. And I remember them. I'm like, oh my God, of course. Yes, I love this lady. Like I will be there. And I show up and this lady is happier than ever. So excited to die. I'm not kidding you. I'm not kidding. Excited to die. Like laughing, having a good time, like ready to go. Like no, and her kids were kind of like pissed that she's so happy. And she goes to bed. They get the wedding album and she's like looking at all of her wedding pictures. The kids mixed up the drink for her, which is like, she could have done it herself, but whatever. Whatever. I'm just letting them do whatever they want to do. I'm just sort of making sure everything's okay. And I've never seen someone, not a second thought. Every other person I've ever watched has been kind of like, or like, okay, here it goes. Like, we love you. This lady like grabbed it from her kid and just drank it. And was like, okay, bitches. I guess we're doing this. Like, so she was ready. And what's funny is normally, like I said, normally people drink it and then fall asleep pretty quickly, but then their body doesn't die for another 45 minutes to an hour. Not her. She drank it. 5 minutes later, dead.
Wow.
Just so ready.
Done. She was done. And her kids really were kind of like laughing about it because like there was nothing else to do except for that because it was almost comical how she was so ready.
You also, in that moment, you can be sad for yourself because you're going to miss that person, but you can't be sad for them if they don't want to be here. Like,
I know.
And also, I think like we said, there's a very big difference between a tragedy, someone losing their life very young, and someone who has lived their life and they have seen everybody else that they love die before them. They've lost their friends, they've lost their husband, they've lost their sisters, their brothers, their own parents, and they know that there's no more life ahead except basically decaying. I have like a real understanding as to why someone would get to that point and go, okay, I am absolutely done now.
Yeah, and this is why I'm so emotional about that story because like I just think I really am because I just think like this person has lived all the life they want and 20 years without your soulmate. I just think if a human makes that decision at that age to be like I really, really want to go, like please help me. And when we say, nah, you got to stay here. Like we're going to put you through it. We're going to make you suffer. I don't understand it.
Julie, do you think in your experience and in all the families that you've witnessed that have gone through death and the varying stages towards it, do you think that overarchingly death is just considering how common it is that it's going to happen to everyone, it's something that we so deeply try and avoid conversations around?
Yeah, I feel like generally speaking, worldwide, something has happened in the past, century where we've really, because we've made such great advances in living, which is amazing, we've like gone backwards in this idea of like that we're all going to die. I feel like it was a little more in our faces before. People died more often. They died in the homes. We had funerals and wakes in homes. And that just has not happened recently. And I think because of that, it's gotten more and more unspoken.
Yeah.
And we need to change it. I can't say it more. Like we need to change the way we look at death and dying. And what I mean by that is just realizing that contemplating our own mortality is not something that's like morose. It's something that can truly help us live better, because there's freedom in understanding that I will die someday. Like, to me, I put my money where my mouth is. I contemplate my own mortality every morning and every night, in the sense of fully understanding that, like, I'm lucky that I have health today.
Yeah.
And if I understand that I feel that I can feel grateful for the health I have today, like, how does that change my outlook on everything? Like, I can feel the breeze more fully. I can feel the sun more fully. I can appreciate my sister more fully, because I understand that won't always be. That won't always be. And I want people to, so to me, it's not morose or like macabre to be like, to think we're going to die. It actually helps us live. It actually helps us live. And I want more people to know that.
Well, with that in mind, you would also spend a lot of time talking to people who maybe have regrets about their life. What do you find are the most common regrets that people have when they're at a point in their life where they know they don't have any life left?
Yeah, so that's the main one, is the health. So that's the main thing that my hospice patients say to me is, I wish I would have appreciated my health, or how I used to be when I was like that. Like, if they can no longer walk, or it's hard to eat, or they don't enjoy food anymore. Now, they might not be feeling like starving, but they wish that they could like enjoy a cheeseburger, right? Or enjoy whatever it is they like. So I think the first regret is usually not appreciating your health. The second one is always working too much. So working your life away, which is easier said than done, because we live in a society where it feels like we kind of have to work. And then they usually have some kind of regret of not speaking their mind more, saying things they've always wanted to say to people, a lot of that. If they're willing to actually contemplate those things. Some people aren't. People die the way they lived. So if someone's been emotionally unavailable for 65 years, they're not going to suddenly become emotionally available just because they're dying. Usually. But sometimes they get there.
It's so interesting, because you kind of almost think that most people would have this like reflection or revelation on their life, but you're so right. Like, if you don't just change who you are because you're at the end of your life. If you're stubborn and didn't appreciate those things when you were alive, you're probably not going to appreciate them when you're dying.
When you might be passing away, or you have a family member that is nearing the end of life, what is the information you think that they need to be knowing, or the conversations they need to be having?
The first thing is what their death looks like to their particular disease. I think we don't talk about like actual specifics, because people will be like, just general. No, people on hospice or palliative care see this type of disease probably a lot. What can I expect? Every time I give specific things to people who are dying with specific diseases, the look of relief that comes on their face, they do not look more afraid. They act thankful and relieved that at least they know kind of what to expect. So what does your disease process usually look like in the disease progression? How can we help those things? So knowing that, so you can better prepare yourself and your family. And then also knowing, we plan for everything: weddings, babies, vacation. We know all these little details to make everything work right. That is how death should be as well. So it's like, what kind of funeral do you want? If you want a funeral, do you want to be buried, cremated? Do you want to be resuscitated? Do you not? I know this is kind of like a long laundry list now, but like, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to plan. So basically having at least one person who you trust and love know the things that you want medically.
I actually just even regret this now. So this was just on the weekend for me, but I took my partner Ben up to see my family in like a country town that we live in, and where my nana is, because he's only ever met her once. Anyway, we were at, believe it or not, a sporting event watching a niece and nephew, and my nana was there. She's in her mid-80s. She's very healthy. She still lives alone. But in the middle of the football match, she stopped and she turned around to me and she took her ring off and she gave it to me and she said, "I want you to have this." And I was like, "I'm not taking that, Nana. Why?" And she's like, "Because I know you've always liked it. And if I die, you just have it. Just take it now." And I said, it's very stupidly, I was like, "You're not going to die, Nana. Like, I'm not taking it. Let's talk about it when it happens." And I just brushed it to the side. And then I thought, why didn't I sit in that? That was her reaching out to say, like, maybe let's talk about this, what it's going to look like. And I didn't ask her any questions about what she wants when she passes away or when that time comes. And that time will come. She's mid to late 80s. And now I'm having this conversation with you. I thought, why did I just pretend like it's not going to happen? Why didn't I have that conversation with her? Because it's such an important thing to have. And I think that that's really something for everyone to think about right now is maybe you're afraid of dying, but the person that your family member that's reaching out to you to have those conversations, when the time comes, they want to be buried the way they want to be buried. It might be a cremation, it might be a burial, it might be depending on where. And if you don't know that information, it's not going to be great for the person that you're burying. And it's also not going to be great for you when you feel that heavy regret of, I don't even know if I'm giving them what they want.
Yeah. And it's hard when you're already in that mode of grief you do have to walk. People don't realize you have to get into like business mode. Like people are going to be calling you, businesses being like, what kind of flowers do you want? What kind of where's the death certificate? Like things that you don't think about, right? But if you already have this planned out, it won't be as hard.
Julie, the name of your book is called Nothing to Fear. We die the way we lived. Be intentional about both. And that's such a powerful sentence in itself. But what do you mean by that?
So like I said before, so we die the way we lived, meaning like I can think for me, if I can speak on my behalf, right? I know that I'm a little neurotic. I like to control. I don't want to let things go. I'm not very flexible. I like things the way they are. I don't want to ask for help, right? So if I continue to live that way, I'm going to die that way. And guess what? People who die that way, it's not the greatest because I've seen it. People who are getting towards the end of life, if they're unwilling to ask for help, if they're unwilling to be flexible and make changes, it's harder on them and their families. So I know that that's something I need to work on now. Be intentional about both. So be intentional about my life, how I live my life, like my shortcomings. And I truly believe that if I can do that, I will live better just because I'm not dead yet. And I know I'll die better because I've seen it firsthand, what it looks like when someone's unwilling, because it's hard, unwilling to be flexible and change. You're going to change at the end of life. Your body will change, end of story. Unless you're getting hit by a bus and you're like dead immediately, right? Unless it's a sudden thing. If it's not a sudden thing, your body's going to change. And you have to try to let go of what you thought it was going to be. And I'm saying this to myself because I have a hard time with that. So we have to look at our life, look at how we're living. What can we work on? And I truly believe that like being intentional about how we live will help us die.
It's honestly so beautiful to speak to someone who cares so deeply about this space because, you know, you never have to think about it until you're in it. But the reality is it is something we should think about because I see it in my own family, the lack of preparation. And I see it in my mum still. And I hope if she listens to this, doesn't feel bad about me saying this. There's always a lot of denial and has been a lot of denial up until a point where there couldn't be any more denial because it's now something that is inescapable.
Also a coping mechanism.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. But also it does feel like some more preparation would have made everybody's life more manageable, maybe happier in some ways as well. Even like the things that you were saying around how and like, you know, maybe getting passwords for things and joint bank accounts and the things that make life easier in the day to day. It's like avoiding that sort of stuff right until the end actually just makes everything so much harder. And that's definitely a situation that I know our family has been going through. But I appreciate everything that you share with us and also just in the way that you speak about death not being this thing that we have to be so petrified of, how that can live alongside still having the same amount of grief is really, really beautiful and it's so deeply appreciated.
Thank you. Yes, and if your mom is listening to this, listen, you and your mom, it's so normal I want everyone to know that like it is so normal to live in denial, to live in fear, to live in anger about this. And let's talk about it anyway. It can be messy, it can be hard, we can do it wrong. And that's still better than just not. So even if even by you saying that, it's like you're already a step ahead of many people.
We are going to link your book and your TikTok and all your socials in our information bio on the podcast. So if you're listening and you want to know more, I do not have anyone dying right now. Like I'm not going through what Laura's going through, but I still, in a weird way, thoroughly enjoyed your information and your videos.
So interesting.
Yeah. So we're putting all that in the show notes. And Julie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it. So wonderful meeting you too.